Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Diseases and Epidemiology, Lesson 3. Today, we are going to talk about the uses of epidemiology. So let's get into it. So the uses of epidemiology, the first of the four we're going to talk about today is assessing the community's health. Because in epidemiology, if you remember from our first lesson, it's focusing on the population rather than an individual. So in order to assess the community's health, epidemiologists have to find relevant sources of data, identify it, and they have to analyze it based on person, place, and time. So some of the questions they might ask are, what are the actual and potential health problems in the community? Where are they occurring? Which populations are at increased risk? Which problems have declined over time? Which ones are increasing or have the potential to increase? And how do these patterns relate to the level and distribution of public health services available? However, after you ask these questions, sometimes more detailed data needs to be collected and analyzed to determine whether health services are available, accessible, effective, and efficient. So, an example of using epidemiology to assess the community's health is when public health officials used epidemiologic data and methods to identify baselines and to set health goals for the nation in 2000 and 2010 and monitor progress toward these goals. Now, moving on to the next use, making individual decisions. So, whenever an individual, makes a decision, you might be consciously or unconsciously aware of an epidemiologist's assessments of risk. That's just saying how much risk is put into this activity, how much risk is in this activity. And from there, it's kind of like a pros and a cons list. And that's how a lot of people make decisions. And since World War II, epidemiologists have provided information related to many decisions. Decisions concerning health, concerning safety, and etc. So some decisions I have here, and I've just listed them. So number one is quit smoking. Number two is climb the stairs. And number three is eat a salad. Now, normally when you're making a decision, there's another option that you're choosing not to do in order to choose the thing you are going to do. For example, quit smoking. The opposite would be continue smoking. Now, why did you choose to quit smoking? Well, in the 1950s, Donald Hill realized that the risk of lung cancer was higher in people who smoke. So you might say, I'm going to quit smoking to reduce the risk of lung cancer. Now, climbing the stairs. Now, if you choose to climb the stairs, you choose not to take the elevator. So this is because in the 1970s, epidemiologists also realized that it could reduce the risk of heart disease if you are more physically active and get your exercise in. And number three would be to eat a salad rather than a cheeseburger, for instance. And that also is to reduce the risk of heart disease because eating healthier is better for you. So after that, we have completing the clinical picture. So I have an example of how this works because even though epidemiologists are going around and they're taking all this data, sometimes they're not always able to get the whole picture, the whole clinical picture. So that's where people such as physicians might come in and they will like help with that. Or it could be the other way around, which is in this case, where physicians find something that is a bit strange, like a certain increase of diseases or something, and then they will report it to epidemiologists, and people will use epidemiology in order to complete the picture. So the example here is in late 1989, a physician saw 3 patients with unexplained eosinophilia and myogaxias, and the physician could not make a definitive diagnosis because it did not match any of the diseases that he was familiar with. So he notified public health authorities. Public health authorities, epidemiologists, same thing. And within weeks, epidemiologists had identified enough other cases to characterize the spectrum and course of the illness, enough to characterize the illness as eosinophilia myalgia syndrome. So for our final use is searching for causes. Because diseases are not random, they have to be caused by something. So much of epidemiology research searches for causal factors that influence one's risk of disease in order to take appropriate public health action. Now, here's an important question to consider. Can epidemiology really prove a causal relationship between an exposure and a disease if much of it is based on ecologic reasoning? Now you might be wondering, what is ecologic reasoning? And I don't really know about this question. Well, first let me define ecologic reasoning. So ecologic reasoning is reasoning from ecologic studies that focuses on the comparison of groups rather than individuals to aggregate measures. So instead of looking at individuals, you would sort those individuals into groups and then compare the groups. So if we go back to the question, the issue is if we are aggregating these measures and we're combining these people into groups, we're losing some information that comes from the individual. And who's to say that this one group, all the characteristics are the same? Like if I give an example, like there's a case of E. coli going around, and you think a cause is this particular food item at a picnic, and you're saying, okay, my groups are people who ate the food item and people who didn't eat it. But something you might want to consider is, oh, but this person in the group that did eat it only ate a bite, while this other person ate like 10 dishes. So when you put them all in one group to say like you ate it or not, you're losing that information. So the answer we get to this question, can epidemiology prove a causal relationship between an exposure and a disease, is no. But epidemiology often provides enough information to support effective action. Examples being John Snow's investigation of cholera and the withdrawal of a vaccine against rotavirus in 1999 because of the increased risk of intussusception. So now that I've explained the 4 uses of epidemiology, let's do a quick review with a case study. So here is the case study that we're going to do. So in August 1999, epidemiologists learned of a cluster of cases of encephalitis caused by the West Nile virus infection among residents of Queens, New York. West Nile virus infection transmitted by mosquitoes had never before been identified in North America. So encephalitis is like the inflammation of the brain, and it can be a pretty serious disease. And the fact that it had never been identified in North America might be an issue because you're thinking, oh, could this lead to this deadly virus that's going to go around in this completely new place? So that's kind of what it's saying. So this could pose a health risk. how might this information be used for assessing the community's health or making decisions about individual patients, documenting the clinical picture of the illness, and searching for causes to prevent future outbreaks. So let's start with the first one, assessing the community's health. So the case study that we're given was very short. It was 2 sentences. And it did give us a lot of information. It gave us where, it gave us when, and it gave us how. But public health officials must also seek additional information, such as, is the cluster limited to persons who had just returned from traveling, where the West Nile virus infection is common, or was the infection acquired locally, indicating that the community is truly at risk? So in order to get this information, the official could check whether hospitals have seen more patients than usual for encephalitis, and mosquito traps could be placed to catch mosquitoes and test for the presence of the West Nile virus, because mosquitoes do carry the virus. Now, for individuals, once again, because you know that it is spread by mosquitoes, you might be thinking, oh, if there's a chance of me getting this disease from mosquitoes, maybe I don't want to be at a place or like at the time of day where there are a lot of them, because that might increase my risk. So once again, that's using the assessment of risk that we mentioned before. So people who spend time outdoors, particularly at times such as dusk, when mosquitoes may be most active, can make personal decisions to reduce their risk or not. So for example, an avid gardener might or might not decide to reduce time spent gardening in the evening, or he could use insect repellent, or he could wear long pants and long sleeve shirts, all things to reduce that risk from the mosquitoes. So for the clinical one, there are also a bunch of data that the short blurb that we got didn't cover. Stuff such as symptoms or what percentage or portion of people infected with the virus actually develop encephalitis. Like, do some people have milder symptoms? Do they have no symptoms at all? Are they asymptomatic? Investigators could conduct a serosurvey to assess infection, and they could ask about the symptoms and illness in order to get this information. And a few other questions might be, what becomes of people who did develop encephalitis? Did they recover with no complications? Did they recover with complications? Are they still sick? Or did they die? Questions like these. And finally, the causes. So even though we are given the cause and the mode of transmission, like, the mosquitoes and the West Nile virus, public health officials can still ask many questions about the virus or the mosquitoes themselves. Because you got to ask, how was the virus introduced? If the virus had never been seen before in North America, and North America is surrounded by all of these oceans where it's nearly impossible for viruses to survive because there's just no people out there. We gotta ask, how was the virus introduced? Was it from someone who visited an area where they did have this virus and they carried it back to North America, or was it by a bird that flew over the ocean? Or was it bioterrorism? Was this an intentional spread of the disease? And about the mosquito, you can ask what types of mosquitoes could transmit the virus. All types of mosquitoes, only certain types? Like, questions you always want to consider. Because once you know this information, you could help the community. You can make policies that protect people against it. And if you do find out that it's like, for example, this one species of mosquitoes, well, then it'll be easier for other researchers and other people to find a way to maybe prevent that one mosquito from spreading it around. Like, there are a number of different solutions you can have to this problem if you know all of this information. So, yeah, just something to consider. Like, you always want to be thinking, what more can I know about this case? Like, what other information is important to this? And how can that additional information be used to help the general population? So, yeah, that finishes off today's class. And now I'm going to tell you to subscribe and visit our website, nearanchor.org, to maybe sign up for some Zoom classes or for some tutoring. And if you are a high school student interested in our organization, you can become a volunteer. So thank you and thanks for listening.